What's going on? Why is Facebook? Oh. Facebook does not want me to go live for some reason. Why not? It's new. Sorry for this, Rick.
That's all right.
Oh, there we go. I have to uncheck that. Okay, now I'm ready.
All right.
All right, we're live.
Yay.
Rick, welcome to the show. How are you tonight, sir?
Wonderful, 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 Scott. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be on here. I'm impressed with your podcast and the good work that you do.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for coming out, and thanks for what we're going to be talking about today, i.e., your book.
Oh, you have one. Ooh,
I have a copy. Look at that. So, Leadership Rites of Passage. Very interesting take on leadership. A different style that I have yet to read. I mean, this is the first time I've seen this style, I should say. Not that I have yet to read your book. Of course, I've read your book. So, what was the inspiration behind that style? Because it's not a style that I've read before. Let's go with that first.
Yeah, that's a great question to open with. So, I've been working with leaders for more than 25 years. I started with strategic planning and corporate culture, and I was sort of the X's and O's, nuts and bolts, although I have actually, by way of background, a Ph.D. in psychology, and I was a psychotherapist for years early on and drifted over to the business side. So I guess I'm sort of ambidextrous. I've got a right brain and a left brain thing going on. And one of the things that I have become frustrated with is that, if you go to the airport bookstore, you'll see books on leadership and they say, do this one thing and you'll be a great leader. And 20 years ago, I thought, yeah, that's right. And eventually I thought, no, it's more complicated than that. So I took a deep dive into the literature and I found there's a lot of tall grass there, a lot of, I won't say weeds, well, there are some weeds, but how does a new leader, a young leader, or even maybe a mid-career leader who says, I want to focus on my leadership, how do they find where the gems are amidst 100,000 leadership books? So I have a library of that, many of which you can see behind me if you're live streaming. And I thought, I'm going to write a lit review. And so I started typing. By page 10, I was bored. And I thought, leadership needs a story. You need a guy or a gal that you like, that you really are identifying with and you're rooting for. And then we see their leadership challenges as they go through. And then I thought, well, we need a mentor who can point him or her to the great works in the leadership literature, some of which are masterworks that we all should know, but some of which are not. They're new or they're relatively new, and they're not sort of the top 50 leadership books in the world, but they're true gems. And so I created a fellow, and his name is Joe Miller, and he's a fictitious character, and this book tells his story. But soon he finds a mentor whose name is Sagan Cruz. And so the reader gets the entertainment of the story, like a novel. And in the midst of that, gets some real gems that Sagan Cruz points Joe to. But Sagan takes it seriously. So Joe presents a leadership dilemma, and Sagan summarizes a masterwork in like 3 sentences or 4 sentences, just enough so the reader of my book can say, I want to pick up that and read it. It is not intended to be like a total summary of each of these masterworks. So that began how I approached this book. And I'll tell you, I came to like Joe Miller and like Sagan Cruz as if they're real people, like they're friends of mine. So I'm hoping that the reader, some readers, will feel the same way about these 2 guys. So that was how I kind of approached this, how I got started.
No, it's definitely different for sure. Not necessarily the story part, because I've seen write books, leadership books that have had stories, or other books that have had that kind of story, but really wants to provide you lessons and going about your journey. But the rites of passage was really that struck out to me, because when I think of rites of passage, my bachelor is in history, so I go back to the Roman days, right? where back in those times you had rites of passage of becoming from a boy to a man, and then a man to a warrior, etc. When I think of rites of passage, and I hear of another great podcaster out there by named Larry Hagner, who runs the Dad Edge podcast, fantastic show that I listen to all the time, and he talks about rites of passage for his kids. So it's kind of coming back, but now we have rites of passage for a leader. So what for you, from your standpoint, what are some of those rites of passage that we as leaders go through in our journey as we grow and develop and become better leaders?
Well, so thank you. That's a great way to introduce this. It's true. We even still today have rites of passage. Think about a Christian child. They have baptism, maybe confirmation, depending on their denomination. A Jewish child might have a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. And then we have other rites of passage. Isn't it the first day a boy pins a corsage on a girl for prom? Wow, that's a rite of passage, isn't it? He's moving from his old chapter to a different chapter. Or when we graduate from college or get married or have our first baby, or actually second, third, fourth baby, every baby is a rite of passage. And so we have these milestones, but each milestone presents a challenge. And so the problem is, how does a leader identify, here is the challenge, here's the rite of passage that I must address now? What are they, right? So I identify 16. I don't think this is all of them, but we can make 16 in a way that allows a journey from age 25 years old up to age 75, from when we see young Joe Miller in the very, very beginning. He's so green and he's overwhelmed and he's kind of lost, until in the end, he gives his retirement speech. And if you get that far in the book, get the Kleenex, because I'm telling you, if you have a heart, it'll touch it, right? So he goes to see Sagan Cruz and he wants money. He needs help. His company is sinking. He inherited it from his father. Well, he went to work for his father thinking this will be an easy ride. And 6 months later, his father died. And so he's now a 25-year-old CEO. But gosh, they're doing well. So he decides to be daring and he buys a competitor not too far away, 3-hour drive, for $4 million. Well, for a small company, that's scary. And immediately the economy falls into a deep recession. He can't pay his bills. His customers aren't paying him. And he looks at 75 employees and says, these people need to feed their families. I'm scared. So he goes to see Sagan Cruz, and there's a wonderful backstory to how he and Sagan Cruz connected. And Sagan says, I am not going to give you what you asked for, Joe, but I will give you what you need. I will send you on a journey. And on this journey, there will be leadership challenges that will call to you. And you must address them. If you ignore them, they will not go away. They will keep calling to you through your entire career until you master them. So we could think, for example, as a young leader, I myself, I had a difficult time having that hard conversation with somebody. I didn't want to do it. Well, you need to master it. You don't have to like it or think it's easy, but you got to do it. So if you don't, that will continue to call to you for your entire career. So there are 16 of these, but 16 is too many. So Sagan tells Joe, I'm going to send you on this journey. Think of yourself as sailing an old-time sailing ship. And you're in rough, choppy waters, but you can see a narrow passageway and there is smoother water through there. And that is your leadership rite of passage to go through there. However, once you go through there, you'll be elevated to a higher level and a higher, more abstract challenge will call to you. And this will continue so that you never cross the finish line. There's always one more challenge. So Sagan organizes this into really 4 missions. And the first one is take the lead. And there are 5 rites of passage under that. And then the second one is create followers. And there are 4 under that. Then the third one is become a leader of leaders. And there are 4 under that. And then the last one is master the psychology of leadership. So there are 4 missions, 16 passages that will call to this fellow as he goes through his career. For me, this was fun, and I've led 2 firms, and I can tell you a whole lot of these rites of passage have called to me. I have felt it myself. And so I'm kind of Joe Miller and I'm kind of Sagan Cruz. Both people say, you're Sagan Cruz, aren't you? And I think, thank you. He's wise and thoughtful and he's got empathy. But I also have taken it on the chin a few times as a leader, as has every leader, right?
I say we're, well, it depends on where you're at in your career, but I don't think you ever stop being Joe Miller. And I often argue the moment that you do stop being Joe Miller is the moment you become useless to your organization and to your team, because that means you've stopped learning. And if anyone can say anything, the world doesn't stop changing. And as leaders, we need to keep up with the times and keep going. But I definitely like your analogy. And so I would say we're kind of both all the time.
Yes, you're right. I think so. If you could visit with any leader, pick the one you think is the greatest leader. It could be Nelson Mandela. It could be Mother Teresa. It could be, I don't know, just pick the one you think you had it. You were it. And if we could interview them and say, did you cross the finish line? Is there no leadership challenge that you would need to work on tomorrow if you could go back to work? They would start laughing and say, oh, I have so many. You never cross the finish line.
No, for sure. There is no finish line in my point of view. But I definitely would like to, do a nice overview of your 4 themes there through the book. And you started off with take the lead. So let's talk a bit about that. What do you mean by take the lead? Is that just simply, hey, I'm the boss, I'm in charge, I'm ready to go? I don't think so. Well, so let's hear what Mark has to say about that.
Okay, so young Joe Miller goes to see Sagan, and they're ironing out issues and details. And the first thing Sagan says to him is, I want you, Joe, to go away, come back in a week, and I have only one question to ask you. Are you all in? And Joe looks at him and thinks, what kind of question is that? I'm here because I'm drowning. I can't pay my people. Are you all in? Are you willing to die trying to lead and help these people? Think about it. Don't answer me now. Joe comes back and he says, I am. So in this book, Joe had a history of having been a medevac helicopter pilot. Through a twisted collection of circumstances, he ended up in the Army, and they could see he's no killer, but he was smart. and he was compassionate. So they said, he's a helper. We're going to put him in a helicopter and have him evacuate people. And Sagan says, when you were in that helicopter, you were willing to die trying to save your troops. What about this? And Joe says, absolutely. In fact, I'll go bankrupt. I'll sleep in my office, but I'm going to make this work because I look at those faces of my people. So that's the first piece of take the lead. Joe doesn't know what to do. The world has changed. Even if there weren't a recession, his company would be declining because while his company had operated on a relationship platform, close relationships, lots of favors, much kindness, what more can we do for you, high service. Now, all the competitors were operating on efficient platform. They were becoming quicker, faster, cheaper, quicker, faster, cheaper, and he was getting lost and he didn't know it. So he says to Sagan, I don't know what to do with strategy. And Sagan says, collect your senior team and draw them into the cone of uncertainty. So Joe, of course, is, what is that? Well, think of a funnel, right? And so his senior team is supposed to, along with him, take these issues and swirl them around, and they're supposed to come up with idea. Many of them impossible, won't work. But that funnel starts to narrow. Well, they all look at him when he says this and they say, you're the leader. You're supposed to come up with the turnaround plan. You tell us. And so he feels like a weak leader. Eventually, he does draw them into that and they come up with a turnaround plan that really works and it hits them with a solid boost. However, what we see in degenerating companies is there's a lot of palace intrigue and a lot of betrayal and a lot of people walking around saying that the boss doesn't know what to do. And Joe gets hit hard by someone he trusted, hearing them sabotage him behind his back, and he's crushed. And so he goes to see Sagan, and Sagan gives him good support and says, okay, first of all, with this, you need to go third person. And Joe says, what is that? Go third person. Take 2 steps away from yourself. Be objective, like a doctor looking at an x-ray. Just be third person and ask, how do I deal with this? This is all part of taking the lead. And he said, allow the space between us. That means your employees are your friends with a lowercase f for friends. Don't allow them to take all the space between you and them because you may need to coach them, you may need to fire them, you may need to something. And also, if you can put a little space between you and them, then you will be able to be the boss. And finally, Joe, take the lead. What's that? He said, well, do you have meetings? No, if there's an issue, I go to whoever it is. Okay, you need to set up an agenda of meetings, operational meetings, planning meetings, supply meetings, and sales meetings, et cetera. And you need to have them on a schedule and start on time, end on time, have an agenda, and make assignments. So Joe says, Sagan, that's not me. I'm very informal. I just go and problem solve with whoever it is. So Scott, I can tell you, this sounds like someone who's green and new, but I have seen, and I'm not the only one who has, $100 million companies where there's no meetings. Well, they meet with the accountant or the CFO at the end of the month. How we doing? But it's like 3 people in the meeting. And so have meetings, start to process together, start to take it off of you and put it on them and say, we need the collective wisdom of all of us. So there's a story about this. Gregory Peck, the great actor, To Kill a Mockingbird, was known to have difficulty making decisions. And his wife, he was a celebrity and he was doing a movie on patent, and his wife was in a car, and the realtor took her to see a house and she loved it. So she called the studio and said, have him come over here at lunch. Well, they were filming and they had a tight lunch break. So the studio gave him a car, which was a limousine. And he had enough time to get there, look around, and get back. That's it. But he was known to have such difficulty making decisions. Well, he pulls up in a limousine dressed like General Patton, a 4-star general. He steps out, he walks up to the house, he walks through the house all around, and he says to her, do you like it? And she says, I love it. And he looks at the realtor and says, I'll take it. Gets in the car and is whisked away. Well, there's a wonderful book by Ibenia. Her last name is Ibenia, I-B-E-N-A, first name Hermania, called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. We believe, most of us, you need to change your thinking in order to change your behavior. And she says the opposite, just act like a leader, like Gregory Peck did. Be a big shot general, walk in like you own that house already, walk around, say to your wife, do you like it? I love it. We'll take it. And just get back in your limo and be whisked away. So many leaders who would say, I'm not comfortable having a lot of meetings. I'm not comfortable taking charge. And you know, it's even mid-career and late career leaders that I have seen. So we think of this as an early stage, but what we do know about this, I just named 5 rites of passage. Take the lead, know who and what you are, enter the cone of uncertainty, the space between us, and then the 5th one, take the lead. We think of that as early stage. What we do know, which it isn't, what we do know is that there are many who are mid-stage, but we see these 5 as easy to identify. If you go consult with a leader and they're not having meetings and they're not taking charge and they're severely injured by things people do, it's easy to point to these, but they get murkier and cloudier as you move along in these rites of passage. Well, I've given you a really long answer. You can take the rest of the hour off. I'll just keep talking. How's that? Sorry, I give you my apology.
No, there's nothing to apologize about. Well, we're here to listen to you and your wisdom and the lessons that you've written down, and you've definitely, yes, long answer, but not a long-winded, dragged out answer, but rather an answer that was, very depth, deep and with a lot of different aspects. And I liked a lot that you said in there about, the story about the limousine and dressing up as General Patton. That's a good one. I enjoyed that. But I like to go back to, the original, being all, in the theme of just being all in. And I often talk about what I call extreme leadership. And that is, you are in, you need to be the leader. You need to own everything. You need to make those decisions, make those calls, be that rock for your people. But at the same time, you need to show humility. You need to show compassion. You need empathy, all these different characteristics. But at the end of the day, you got to be in, because leadership is not a, I do it sometimes when I feel like it kind of thing. Because then you lose credibility. And without credibility, you can't be a leader. It's the cornerstone. As far as I'm concerned, it's the absolute cornerstone. So I really enjoyed the whole theme of, are you all in? You have to be all in. And I like that part of the book where he's like, are you in? Are you all in? Or if you're not, then, well, you know what? This isn't for you. Ultimately is what I would have expected. It would have been a response.
Well, and Joe Miller could easily have declared bankruptcy, closed the doors, and walked away. He had a college degree, he had military experience, he could have gone and found a job, but he wasn't about to do that. And when he said, those people on my medevac chopper, they were depending on me, so are my employees now, I'm all in. Boy, you get a sense that I want to work for this guy,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a story. I was talking to a business leader, And he was telling me about the 2008 financial crash and relatively small company. And overnight, all sales just dropped. All orders dropped. Everything just dropped. And he walked into his team, and he could have did one of two things. He said, "I could have, hit it all, or I could be completely transparent." And he said, "I went the latter. I went completely transparent." He said, "We will get through this. We're not the only ones in this situation. And the goal is, and I'll do my best to make sure we do not have one person leave this company if we don't have to. And if you stick with me, you stick to what I have to say, and listen to the plan, and follow the plan and be here with me. I promise you, on the other side, we'll be better." And he went through the whole 2008 financial crisis, didn't lose a person. He had days where he said people would just show up work and did absolutely nothing because there was nothing to do. And right, because that's how bad it was. But at the end of the day, not one person quit. Not one person had to get laid off. Not one person left for whatever reason. And that is all in. That is it.
That is all in. That is.
So let's talk about the second. What you refer to as the second mission in your book there, and that is creating followers. So how does one even create followers in the first place? Like, I can't twist someone's arm and say, "Hey, follow me," or like, come everyone, look at me. You have to influence and mold people, not mold people, but get people inspired to follow you. So again, how do we go about doing that?
Well, that is a very good question. And I'll say, I can talk to very experienced leaders who have tremendous responsibilities and ask them about leadership, and they have a lot to say. But then when I say, "What about followership?" some of them just look at me like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" It's not a hard concept. It's just that they don't have that in their vocabulary. They don't have that top of mind. They're not thinking about it when they're driving to work and they're stopped at a red light. How am I doing with developing followers? This is one of my favorite sections. So this is the second mission. Sagan says to him, "You've done well in the first mission. You are all in. You've pulled your senior people into the cone of uncertainty. They didn't like it, but it ramped them up, and they collectively created a plan that now they own because they were involved, and you led them through that. So bravo to you, Joe. You took the lead. So far, so good." Sagan notices a frustration in Joe, and Joe says, "I travel around and talk to all my various employees, and there's so many. There's some who are highly committed, and some are not so committed, and some who are friendly, some who are not friendly. I don't think we have a culture." Joe, what? He says, "Well, maybe your next mission should be to create followers. You, Joe, are on a good path, but they haven't joined you on that path to the extent that you would like." And Joe's like, "That's exactly right." Sagan has the ability to draw forward what the next rite of passage is, leadership rites of passage. This book is written not just for an aspiring leader, but for mentors, that a mentor can read this book and say, "I want to be Sagan Cruz. This guy's got it. I want to copy how he does things." So he said, "How do I create followers?" And he says, "Joe, you create followers by creating attachment between you and your followers." And he says, so first of all, think about anytime you make a change, then you are leader and you are change agent, right? And when you do that, there will be winners and losers, and your teammates, your employees, your folks will be afraid, "Hey, when this happens, maybe I'm on the losing side." There's a wonderful book. It's I don't know, maybe it's 5th edition, called "Making Sense of Change Management" by Esther Cameron and Mike Green. And I reference it in my book. There's another one where Sagan points to a book for Joe. So the reader of my book can say, "I think I want to pick up that book as well." And They talk about the leader as a change agent, and they say there will be winners and losers, and you have to address the winners and the losers and go to them. And Sagan tells Joe a story. This is all under the rite of passage, create followers. He says, let me tell you about a great leader, Mao Tse-tung. And Joe's like, what? What I know about him is he killed millions of people or something, right? And he says, Joe, now listen, this also is in a book, Leadership by James McGregor Burns. If you buy one book, well, buy mine. But if you buy 2 books, buy that one. Okay. And he's a winner of the Nobel Prize. He's a winner of the National Book Award. He's got it. And in this book, he says, well, let me tell you about what Mao did. Mao went into the rice paddies in the 20s and 30s, and he worked alongside the peasants. And there was a terribly unfair system where all the sustenance went to the top dogs. And these people worked in rice paddies creating food, and they watched their children starve. And Mao said, I am with you. I am standing by your side. So they had this attachment, this connection, a physical attachment. And he said, and I understand your needs. And then he made a promise. And he said, I am going to get you land and food and sustenance. Okay. So there were 3 things that happened there. 1, he connected to them on a personal level and heard them. And then 2, he showed that he was competent. They liked this guy. He was smart. He was aggressive. They liked him. Like, I'll follow that guy. And then 3rd, he made them the promise. So now he's collecting followers. And millions marched to their deaths in the Chinese Communist Revolution. They believed in him. However, he could create followers, but he could not maintain followers. And that takes us to the next rite of passage, which is respond to followers' changing needs.
No, I definitely enjoy that. That whole analogy, and honestly, the example. There are always good examples of leadership, and there are bad examples of leadership in 2 different lights, i.e., well, things not to do, and then 2, what I refer to.
Don't murder a million people. So what happened was, okay, there became uprisings in all the various provinces. This is in a time when there was not electricity in most of these places, and he could not meet all those needs. So he responded with brutality, okay? Right. And James McGregor Burns says in this book that Sagan Cruz says, look, Joe, I want you to read this book. In that book, Leadership by James McGregor Burns says, brutality is not leadership, it's brutality. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
So in my book, Leadership Rites of Passage, I say, well, how do you do that? And Sagan tells Joe, needs once met will emerge up to the next higher level of need. So if you hire someone who's out of work, they want food, they want a paycheck, they need to pay for their car, their apartment, or their house. They're like, give me a job. Well, a year later, that's not enough. They need to see there's a future for me here. I'm treated well here. Their needs have moved up to a higher level, right? But Mao could not address that. Who did? A very well-known name, Nelson Mandela. He became the first Black president of South Africa. And I had an experience with him. Well, not really. Okay. I got in my car sometime in the mid-1990s and turned on the key, and NPR was on, and there was the National Press Club. And in those days, they would write down a question on an index card, and someone would take it up to the moderator. And so the question was, I didn't know who the speaker was. I'm just starting to drive. And the question was, President Mandela, now that you have taken power, what retribution will you take against your former oppressors? And I hear this voice loud and clear, kind of like Dr. Martin Luther King's voice. I mean, confident, loud, ringing out. And he said 5 words: I do not have time to hate. 7 words. He said, I do not have time to hate. And he said, what people need now is medical clinics, clean water. We need public schools. We need a path to prosperity. Okay, we've taken power. And if I spend all my time hating, then I will do what history has done so many times, and we will become the oppressors. And he said, let me tell you an example. He said, we had vaccinations for a village, and we knew they would come in from the outside too. We thought 200 children would get vaccinated. 2,000 came. Mothers came carrying children through the jungle, along the seashore, holding a child in their arm and a pot of water balanced on their head. They came from everywhere. And he said, with that kind of need, how can we waste our time oppressing our oppressors? And he set up the Truth and Reconciliation Forum. Okay, so here's a guy who takes over power, but he looks to see what's the next level need and what's the next level need. And when he died, he was revered. He is to this day revered by the entire world as a good man and a great leader. But it was because he could respond to followers' changing needs. Pretty impressive, you know? So Joe,
Absolutely.
Joe needs to give these people more than a paycheck.
You know, and I would suggest that is a lesson that a lot of companies out there need to take and hold dearly, because we see the great resignation going on. We heard about the millennial culture changing from job to job consistently throughout, the past number of years. And the reality is, it's because organizations are just not keeping up with the changing needs of their people. That's what you can boil it down to.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So very often the customer determines much about the culture of a company, right? So some companies, if you're in the bread baking business, you bake the bread overnight, and then it's in the grocery store first thing in the morning. Okay, great. But that's a given. Now, within that framework, though, what else can we do to make this a workable, livable place? So there are some givens that are not flexible, but are we still operating from an old standpoint when maybe there's a new agenda that has come in? You can't give them everything, but you can look to see. So what happens here is Sagan says, Joe, there's one more book I want you to read. So this is all in one visit. He gives him these 3 books to read, and they're substantial. And he says it's called Motivation and Personality, Abraham Maslow, 1954. Personally, one of my favorite books. It's right over there in my bookshelf. I'm telling you, it's great. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So imagine you land on you're military. You land on a desert island with a few guys. You got no food, you got no fresh water. There you are. What are you going to do? Well, the first thing you worry about is physical safety. Are there tigers here? Are there snakes here? Are there bad guys here? What's the situation? Okay. And then you look for shelter, right? And then you start to look for belongingness. Okay, we're in this together, guys. Right? Well, once you do all those things, now you form a community and you say, what about esteem? How do I feel about myself in this group? And then finally, self-actualization. How can I be the person I was intended to be? So it's kind of a ladder that goes up. So Sagan says, as you travel around inside your company, I want you to take Maslow's hierarchy of needs and think about your company. And Joe, he's an engineer. He comes back with 23 needs. That is a ladder of needs. And he says, This is what we got to address. Well, okay, good goal. But adopting that mindset, how do people get esteemed? Well, can we get them promoted? Can we give them educational opportunities? Can we have award ceremonies for the guy who comes in early every day and give him an award for being, we're going to give you the early bird award. Come on up here in front of everybody. Can we do these things? Absolutely. And that's that mid-level esteem. But I'm telling you, imagine that happens and he doesn't know it's going to happen. What is the conversation at his dinner table that night? Boom, you nailed it. Hey, boss. Hey, leader. You got a devoted employee now, a devoted teammate, right? So respond to followers' changing needs. It's an art form, and I will say too few leaders think about it or attend to it or master it. And as you said before, you never cross the finish line, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, what I'd like to do with this final segment of the podcast is let's skip over a little bit and jump to building, a leader of leaders, because people who follow this podcast are, we have a wide range. I'll tell you, we have a wide range. We have people who are looking at becoming a leader and trying to get into a leadership role, all the way up to executives to uber large worldwide corporations, and everybody in between. And part of the journey is becoming a leader of leaders. So from your standpoint, what is the best way for leaders out there to go through this rite of passage? When do you feel like you've gotten to that point where you need to now go through this rite of passage, and then how do we go about start building a team of leaders for us to lead?
Well, yeah. So as I said before,
and I'll preface that I know that's a loaded question.
yeah, it is. But pow, I got it. Okay, very good. So the earliest leadership challenges are the most obvious. Take the lead, be the boss, be Gregory Peck stepping out of that limousine. Oh man, I wish I could have been there to see it, right? But then it starts to get a little murkier, like, what do we do? So you're the new president of China, South Africa, whatever, or you've established power. Now what? This gets a little murky, like, what do I need to do? But eventually, the challenge comes, how do I get my work done through the hands of others? And it involves letting go and handing it over. So one of the things we know about Joe Miller is that in high school, he was a cross-country runner. Well, cross-country runners kind of really run one at a time. They're on a team, but the runner just runs. He runs his speed, his race, right? So we think of a guy being independent and solo, and we know about Joe that he was a very responsible guy. Medevac helicopter pilot, he's kind of my hero. I tell you what, that guy's terrific. And he's smart, but you combine those things and you get a guy who does everything himself. He is everywhere. So he comes in to see Sagan. He is now mid-career. He is in 13 states. He has 1,500 employees. Well, you would think maybe he's made it, huh? And Sagan even asks him right about this point in the book, so Joe, you've years ago done your turnaround. You have created your own logistics software before it even was invented. You have adopted a new strategy, and you've built a wonderful team. You've created followers. Are you an extraordinary leader? Maybe we're done, Joe. And Joe's stunned. He looks at him and says, well, I don't feel like I'm done, but Sagan, I don't know what my next challenge is. What is my next leadership rite of passage? And he said, well, what's your frustration? I'm exhausted. That's my frustration. And you know what? We have these locations, and our original 3 locations are generating all the profit for the whole company, and the others are not. And he said, but I keep going out to them. So Sagan wisely looks at him and said, Joe, let me ask you this question. Now, when Sagan says that, Joe should cringe because here it comes. And he says, Joe, when you ran cross country, did the coach ever say to you, look, on mile 2 and 3, I'll substitute for you. I'll run mile 2 and 3. And so then you can get back in the race and be fresh and you can do much better. And of course, Joe says, what? No, what? And he said, well, you do that for your leaders. You have plant managers, you have vice presidents, you have people who are subordinate leaders to you, but you do their work for them. You got to take the training wheels off, Joe. Take it off your shoulders and hand it over. And that's the first rite of passage under become a leader of leaders, hand it over. So I can tell you, of all these, I think that's the most difficult for the leaders that I've worked with. They cannot really hand it over. That doesn't mean be blind to it. You can study outcomes, you can study processes, you can get all the information, but it should be that when you hand something to one of your leaders, it's theirs. And you're available as a resource day and night, but they know it's been placed on their shoulders. And the more you do that, the more weight is lifted off your shoulders. So Joe says, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to step back from it. And Sagan, of course, says your work changes now. You become a full-time coach, more than a doer. Lead, don't do. Then you're becoming a leader of leaders. What follows then is Joe comes in, of course, later, and he says, well, okay, we're in a crisis. The competition's been studying us. They send a little sales car to follow our delivery trucks. They know every single one of our accounts, and they know our prices, and they're undercutting us. Amazing. And they're hiring away our salespeople. Our numbers are plunging like crazy. And Sagan says, well, can they do this forever? No. Why are they doing this? Well, there's a new CEO. He wants to make a name. Okay, Joe, they call that buying the market. Okay, but you are under siege. You are under attack. You need partners. And Joe says, partners? What? I don't want to sell the company. He said, no, your own teammates, your own senior leaders, your own employees, they need to become partners. And he says, you mean an employee stock ownership plan? He says, no, I wasn't thinking of that, but maybe. But you need to make them partners. So there's a wonderful book, McChesney, Covey, and somebody. That was not nice, was it? Where Chris McChesney says, look, imagine you got a group of boys, high school age, with a basketball, and they're dribbling and shooting, dribbling and shooting, dribbling and shooting. What do you see here? Okay. Now imagine you divide them in two, you make teams, and you keep scoring. You say you're playing a game with each other. Suddenly, performance goes way up. Well, why? Because you're keeping score. And he says, make them partners, Joe, and let them tell you how to keep score. This goes to all that Jack Stack, the great game of business, open book management. You don't have to open your books all the way, but each employee should know which activities that he or she does that contribute to the profit or detract from the profit, and then have some sort of profit sharing, something, bonuses, or just figure that out. And then suddenly you will see they will all ramp up to help you get through this. So become a leader of leaders, make them partners, and hand it over. Hand it over. Very difficult to do.
It is the thing I spend the most time coaching my clients on, is letting it go.
Is it really?
Yes, absolutely. Letting it go. And it's hard because guess what? I'll give you an example from about 2 weeks ago. from the man himself right here, where at work we had an issue pop up, and I looked at one of my guys and I said, "You got it, run with it." And I sit in my office and I can overhear him and his team discussing the problem and me getting frothy at the mouth to get involved. But I sit there and I'm like forcibly telling myself, let it go. They have it. They will get they'll get to the finish line. They don't need your intervention on this. You have other things to worry about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Very difficult.
Very difficult.
Very.
But you have to you have to do that. And as I said, my coaching clients, I spend the most time coaching them in proper delegation, a way for them to empower their people to take the lead, run with it, make decisions, but at the same time, keep the leader in that warm, fuzzy space, i.e., getting the information that they want, getting the back briefs that they want, so that, in case it is going off track, you can make the adjustments before it's too late. And that's ultimately, as a leader, that is what makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. You're confident, okay, they have it. And especially as distances grow, i.e., so for my example, it's not a big deal. Like literally the guys are right outside my door, but in other cases, you're talking about hundreds of miles, et cetera, where you don't hear them or see them every day. So how do we manage that, and how do you develop that? And ultimately it goes to, empowering them, giving them ownership of it, which is what I really like about what you talked about, and showing them, not just showing them what it means to the company, but giving them a piece of that, what it means to the company, whether that is profit sharing, whether that is, additional time off, whether that is part of the culture of the organization and being able to influence the way the company is going through future. There's so many different ways to skin that cat. But the moral of the story is you're giving them ownership, and then you're allowing them to do what it is that they need to do. You need to get out of their way so they can do their job on your behalf. So I love that section.
I agree. Yes. And poor Joe, he's so high functioning, he struggles with it, but eventually he does gradually. So these things, you don't just snap your fingers and they happen. These are old emotional habits, and they are difficult to change. But you can't change it unless you can say it. You have to be able to say, here's what I'm working on in my leadership, right?
That's right. You can't be everything to everyone all the time, because that's just going to burn you out and make you useless to everyone.
So this book is not intended to make as I said before, a complete list. Here are all the leadership rites of passage. It's more to get the reader thinking, all right, what is my next leadership rite of passage? What do I need to work on? There was a great study done, I think by McKinsey 10 years ago, and something like why leadership development plans usually fail. And it was because the leaders pick 12 leadership traits to work on. Well, that's too many, right? Pick one or two or maybe three, but understand that this is a developmental progress, and it's a process that takes time. And most people that I see in a workplace say, okay, I say, what do you do for a living? And they say, well, I run this plant. I'm the general manager of this plant, and I have 87 employees working for me, and we make widgets, and here's where it comes in, here's where it goes out, and we're trying to cut waste, and we can't cut waste, and we're trying to improve absenteeism, and but I don't hear him say, I'm a leader, I'm building a team of teams, I'm becoming a leader of leaders, I've got shop foremen or whatever they call them, right? And I'm handing it over to them. And so the purpose of this book was to create a framework for anybody to say, you know what, I have some work to do myself, and to tell it in story fashion so that it's easy to digest. I will tell you, I didn't know how this would do. So when you publish the book, they ask you, do you want to send it to the critics, to the book reviewers? And at first I said, no. I thought, oh man, they're going to say, well, first of all, they're going to say, this obviously is a bright young man, and it was a good try. I said, well, I don't know if I'm bright or young, but I know I'm not young. So I thought, no, I don't even want the critics, right? But they've raved about it. The US Review of Books gave it a glowing review and called it, what I have it here, alluring and an instant must-have guide for building successful leadership foundation. Pacific Book Review called it an engaging business fable. Yahoo Finance featured it. Daily Herald in Chicago featured it. And one of the things the critics said is they like the fact that at the end of each chapter, there are 3 text boxes. One says, here's what's going on with Joe. The second one says, here's what Sagan's really doing. And the third is discussion questions, so that if you work in a company or if you teach leadership, you can use this book as an entire outline for a leadership seminar. The discussion questions are intended to create conversation. And I didn't know whether to include those text boxes. At first, they weren't there. I thought, well, it's obvious to see what's happening. But the critics have said, good job, glad you did that. So you never know. You never know how it's going to go.
Awesome, Rick, my friend. This has been a fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. However, we are winding down here. But before we wrap up and I hit stop on the record and the live stream, which, by the way, for the listener, you can grab these live streams if you follow us on socials. So just go to movingforleadership.com and scroll right to the bottom, and you can find the socials there. And, from time to time, I throw these interviews out on the live, so you get them right away, vice waiting for the podcast to drop on the podcast network. But anyway, before we wrap up here, I do got a couple of last questions for you, Rick. And the first one being a question I asked all the guests here at Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It's going to you, Rick Tirrell. What makes a great leader?
Gosh, there's so many things. I think dedication to mission, caring about the people you lead, and being willing to be all in. I would say that makes a great leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And a final question of the show: how can people find you? How can they follow you? Where can they grab the copy of the book? It's all about you now. Shameless plugs. Have at it.
Shameless self-promotion. I'm ready.
You got it.
Well, the book, as I've said about 100 times in this, is Leadership Rites of Passage. And the name of my firm is Navigator Group. And you can just go to www.navigatorgroupinc.com, navigatorgroupincorporated.com. And it'll have about me and about my experience and what we do. And so, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks for letting me plug myself.
No worries.
As you can see, I'm eager. I'm not shy about it.
And for the listener, it's easy. You just go to movingforleadership.com/196. And the links are in the show notes. Rick, again, my friend, thank you for coming out. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's been an honor, sir.
Pleasure. And I say the same back to you, Scott. Thank you. And best of luck to you. You're doing a great job on this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Stop. Oh, and